Welcome to episode 2 of Project Versus. Just a quick recap of what we did in the first episode. We had a choice of 4 starter rackets where I had to pick 2 out of the 4, and the first pick was the Head Prestige Mid 2018 model. The second racket I chose was the Volkl PowerBridge 10 Mid, and also later on in that episode I bought a pair of Wilson dampeners. So that's 3 items in total, along with a 3 racket Wilson bag, and that stores a total of 10 items. So in this episode, I'm going to be taking both rackets out onto the court. I'm going to play a couple of practice sets, minimum hopefully with each, and we'll see how we get along. We'll look at the strengths of the racket, the weaknesses of the racket, and then maybe some potential changes we could make to address the weaknesses. So that's coming up in this episode, and let's get onto it. For the first racket we're taking out onto court is the Head Prestige Mid, the 2018 version, and I'm going to be playing someone who I played 3 times in the past, and on all 3 occasions the match has gone my way. The first actually ended in a retirement, the second match was close at 7-5, 6-4 to myself, and the third match was the closest at 7-5, 7-6. So I'm looking forward to that. We'll see how we get along. I've got the upper hand so far, but it's been a while since we've last played, and I'm expecting him to have improved since then. The last time we played was about over half a year ago, so yeah, I'm expecting him to come to the court with a few different strategies, and we'll see how we go from there. So let's get to it. Onto the first test of the Prestige Mid, and in the warm-up straight away I noticed that he's playing with a lot of pace and spin, especially off of the forehand side where he's playing with height as well as pace and spin, and so the ball is kicking up even in the warm-up. So as a result, I've got the dampener for a reason, and that's to use it. The dampener itself weighs about 3 grams on the scales, and so that in of itself should help deal with the weight of shot, and also it in theory should reduce the dwell time, which increases the power, and it should reduce the deflection, which should increase the precision. So at least that is what I'm hoping for. And so we take it out into court, and the first 5 games are all on serve. It's 2-3, it's me to serve, and I throw in a pretty sloppy service game full of errors. He goes 4-2 up and holds serve to make it 5-2 to him. Back on serve with me to play, and I hold to make it 5-3 to him, and it's his turn to try and serve it out for the set. And at this point we're into the 9th game, so the balls are starting to fluff up, the conditions are starting to slow down a little bit, and as a result I'm able to get a few more returns back in court. So far I've been very ineffective. I don't even think I've got to 30 on his serve, but it just so happens that in this game I managed to get it to juice. He throws in an error, and then on the break point, the advantage to me, he throws in a double fault, and so I'm back into the set at 4-5 somehow. Don't feel like I've deserved it, but that's how tennis goes sometimes. We trade service holds, and then at 5-6 I throw in another sloppy game full of errors, and at 30-40 I double fault, my first double fault of the match so far. So not great timing there, but it's my first double fault, and sometimes that happens. So overall, so far I'm not really impressed with it, but we'll go more into detail in why. I want to talk about the conditions. It is 6 degrees Celsius, so the ball through the air is already quite slow. It's pretty low bouncing AstroTurf surface, and going into the second set the balls are fluffing up, they're losing pressure, so they're slow through the air and off the court. They're not zipping through like they were at the beginning of the match, and yeah, something to bear in mind as we start the second set. Into the second set, it's on serve at 1-2, where it's me to serve, and I throw in another sloppy game, but not entirely because of me, also because the conditions are slowing down to the point where I feel like I need to press a little bit harder. In the first set, I could play my regular ground strokes and have a little bit of help from the newer balls, where, as in this set and in this game in particular, he's got his head down and he's really trying to make a move and get that break, and it's putting pressure on me, so I'm over pressing a shot, whereas in the first set that would have been either an easy setup for a volley or a winner in and of itself. In this set, he's getting it back, and he's getting it back to a neutral rally, so I'm having to start at 50-50 again, and because of that, subconsciously or pretty much consciously, I know I'm going for more. I make a few errors. He goes 3-1 up, and at this point I realize I don't have any weapons really to trouble him anymore, so the likelihood of me winning this match is becoming closer and closer to zero. I am more relying on his level to drop, and in my head all I'm thinking is I've just got to make him work as hard as possible, and if I lose the match, then I've done what I can. And so that's exactly what I do. We hold service games until 5-3, where it's him to serve it out for the match, and it's match point. I think it's actually advantage to him on match point, and I play this point pretty well actually. I managed to get the return back to a neutral point. We rally until I take the upper hand. I drive a forehand deep into his forehand corner, and I come in behind it. He leaps across and perfectly times a forehand down the line, so he wins the point, he wins the set, and it's a pretty cool point to win the match on. Not much I could have done about that, but overall he played the match quite well. If I pull up the scoreline here, I didn't actually know you could upload practice matches onto this website. It's the first I've heard of it, but there you go. And so from here, we're going to look at where things went wrong, what was good about the setup, and how we could improve it in future. Onto what I thought was good about this setup. The first thing that jumped out at me on court was how effective the slice serve was. Lately, I've been using a lot of slice, because in the past I've been kicking the ball a lot, but that has resulted in me developing an abdominal strain, and so in order to avoid that in future, I've switched purely to a slice serve on first and second serve. And this setup actually does the slice pretty well. Through the air, the ball was moving quite significantly, and off of the AstroTurf surface, especially when it's a little damp, it really does take the slice well, and it skids through quite a bit, which was effective against my opponent. He broke serve 3 times in total, which is still something to note, but the serve itself I don't think was at fault. That was more my ground stroke game and volley game after the serve. So that was a positive to look at. The next I thought was its comfort, and that was more expected, as the string in this racket is Head Sonic Pro, has a very long dwell time, a low to mid stiffness, and so the impact is spread out over a longer period of time, and so at a minimum you would expect some comfort from this setup. So those are the 2 positives I took away from this test, and the first major issue I have with this setup is the lack of precision, the severe lack of precision in fact. Returning serve when the balls were new was almost impossible. I would be using the same block technique, or in my head it felt the same. Of course it could be different in reality, but one block return would go 10 foot above the net, the next block return would go halfway up the net, and that type of massive variance makes it extremely difficult to be aggressive, and to be honest, it makes it impossible. But it was to be expected. It is Head Sonic Pro 17 in the string bed, which has a very long dwell time, has a very high deflection, and so it's expected that the unpredictability would also be very high, but that comes at a major cost. Into the second set, where the balls were slowing up, it was still very, very poor, because now I'm not getting any help with the new balls off of the surface, and the ball's traveling slower through the air. I've got no weapons left. If I try to be aggressive, I try to go closer to the lines, the I'm just reducing my percentages, and I'm not making him work for the point. So I don't have the option of reducing my margin for error. At that point, the only thing I can think of is just to get my head down and grind and make it as difficult as possible for him to win the point, and then hope that he maybe tires, his level drops. But in the end, obviously, it didn't matter. So yeah, a major issue there, the lack of precision from Headsonic Pro. And as a result, I've been looking at the database and trying to identify a string that would address this issue. So what I'm looking for is a reduction in deflection and perhaps a little increase in the stiffness. And I don't want to make too big of a change, because when the variables are all over the place, it becomes more difficult to identify why a string bed is performing the way it is. And so by keeping the changes to a minimum, it's easier to pinpoint what changes in the data have caused a playing characteristic to have changed. So bearing all that in mind, I've got the database up here and scrolling a little bit down on the stiffness scale to Wise Cannon Silver String 1.20. The dwell time comes out at 37.5 milliseconds, the deflection is 34.0 millimeters, and the stiffness is a little bit higher at 167.4 pounds. And so in theory, this should be a tiny bit more precise than the Headsonic Pro, but probably not a big enough difference to warrant spending pretty much all our budget on the string, all our budget at the moment on the string. So what I'm gonna do is scroll a little bit further down. I will add that string to the shortlist, but I'm gonna scroll a little bit further down and maybe add another one to the shortlist. And the next string that pops out to me is the Gosen Poly Professional 17, the 1.24 mil version. And the dwell time for this string comes out at 36.3 milliseconds. The deflection comes out at 33.8 millimeters. And the stiffness is a little bit higher again at 169.2 pounds. So this string, again, it should be easier out on court to take the ball earlier, and we should have a little bit more precision thanks to the lower deflection. If I go across actually as well, and we can see that it has an improved tension maintenance at 44.6%, a higher energy return, so a bit more powerful, and the string to string friction is 0.081, so around about average there as well. But this string, I'm guessing, would be a bit more suitable for the type of playstyle I'm trying to execute out on court. But for the moment, I'm not going to make any changes for two reasons. One being the budget is so low already as it is, and the second, we haven't taken the PowerBridge 10 mid out on court yet. So I'm going to do that first before we make any changes. And I do have an opponent that I'm going to play a couple sets with, and that's with the PowerBridge 10. We'll see how we get on. Again, we'll do a match report, we'll go through the strengths, we'll go through the weaknesses, and then we'll make some decisions from there. So on to the PowerBridge 10 mid, but before we get into the first set report, I just want to talk about the conditions. So it was about 3 degrees Celsius outdoors. So the ball is pretty slow through the air, and it's not damp either. So it's not skidding through the court like it was during our first test. But still, we've got new balls. So for the first set, at least, we should see the ball zip through. And then as the balls lose pressure, which they do very quickly nowadays, it will be a bit slower off the court, even slower through the air. And we'll see how I deal with it. So anyway, on to the first set. I'm trying to execute the strategy of taking the ball early, and even on the return, I'm standing in, especially on the second serve. Sometimes I'll try and drive through it, but most of the time I'll try and stand in and block it. So even though it's not a particularly aggressive shot, the amount of time that he has to react is limited, because I'm standing a couple foot inside the baseline to try and slice it or block it back towards his baseline. And although I feel like I'm playing well in the beginning, I go down a break 3-1, and he's straight away out of the traps really early and playing well. And this particular player has a very strong backhand in any conditions, fast or slow, on any surface. It's much stronger than his forehand, which he uses a quite extreme Western grip. So when the conditions are quick, if you're going to neutralize, you're better off neutralizing to that side of his. And if the conditions do slow up and he has a little bit extra time, then he's more effective. But for now, we're playing with new balls, so my strategy when I need to neutralize is to aim for that side, because if I go to the backhand side, I'm pretty much dead. But anyway, I managed to break back to 3-2 and actually go on a run of 4 straight games. So that was very positive, and this time I'm executing my play style to about the best of ability I personally can, and his level drops slightly, and so I go 5-3 up. He holds his next service game, and I hold my service game to love to take the set 6-4. I just want to say that against this player, about 70% of the sets he will win, so it's a really good test to see where I am in comparison to his game. And so I managed to take the first set. To my surprise, I didn't expect to play that well, but the balls are slowing up. I'm noticing it. They're losing pressure, and so the conditions are getting slower, and by now we know that I don't play all too well when the balls get slower. And also on top of that, it nullifies the playstyle I'm trying to execute, and I mean in the way that the softer balls, they leave the string bed a bit later, so the dwell time is longer and therefore the launch angle is higher. So even though the speed through the air is less, the launch angle off of the string bed is higher, and so the ball actually travels further despite coming off the racket slower, and that's devastating for the type of strategy I'm trying to execute, which is taking the ball early. I can't take the ball as early as I want to now, because the ball's landing further and more likely to land beyond the baseline. And I've noticed it towards the end of the first set, but as I do, I'm just going to try and grind as hard as I can, try and think of strategies on the fly, and we'll go from there. So on to the second set. And into the second set, my opponent quickly takes a 3-1 lead, and what I had predicted is becoming reality. And not only are the conditions slower, the sun is also coming out, so the ball's bouncing probably a half a foot higher than it usually would. And while he doesn't use bounce on his backhand too much as a weapon, because his forehand is so extreme, when he's able to rip the ball, and he is able to because the conditions are slower, he's ripping that forehand, and the arc of the ball is more steep and it's bouncing higher and it feels heavier. So now I've got 2 weapons to deal with. It's not just his backhand is strong, his forehand is strong. It's being helped by the slower conditions, and the sun's come out, so it's bouncing high, and I don't play with anywhere near as much spin on my ground strokes as my opponent does. And so he's 3-1 up. I think he holds to go 4-1 up. I managed to maybe hold one more service game, but he does take the second set 6-2. And at this point, I really am out of ideas, because I can't take the ball early anymore. The ball's going long all the time, and not just that, the precision's down because the balls are softer, and so the dwell time is longer. It's becoming a little bit more unpredictable. So plan A is not working. Plan B is to grind harder, but the conditions have played right into his strengths. But that is really all I'm left to do, and so I do take a couple foot, or maybe I try to stand on the baseline, or perhaps a foot behind the baseline, and I try to play from there. But the setup isn't designed to do so effectively, and so we've got some big problems. But we'll go into the third set tiebreak, and it's a championship tiebreak. I do manage to take it to 3-all. He gets the mini break to 4-3. And from then on, maybe I'm mentally and physically tired, but he runs away with the tiebreak, and I'm making error after error, trying to overpress like I usually do when the conditions get slow. And I lose the championship tiebreak 10-4. But overall, I thought the first set was really good. If only I could maintain that level for at least a set and a half, if not the full 2 sets, at least a set and a half. At the moment, I'm playing well for about 1 set, and the conditions slow up and my level is dropping. So that's something we need to address. But overall, I'm pretty happy with the way this played. And yeah, we'll talk further about the strengths of this setup and the weaknesses and what we can do from there. Onto the positives of this setup. I thought the most obvious one was the precision with the new balls. The control over the trajectory or the height of the ball was pretty incredible, to be honest. This is one of my favorite setups I think I've ever played with. And not having to worry about the ball going long beyond the baseline, on top of that, it made for a really great experience out on court. And I was able to play inside the baseline, play those volleys, and be aggressive just really at will. And probably one of the best performances I've played, and that really is thanks down to the setup, the string and the racket together. They really complement each other. So the precision would be the first positive. The second positive, not quite as important, but still important, because I have suffered from arm injuries in the past, as many tennis players have. But despite it feeling a little stiff out on court or on the database being mid-range stiffness, I didn't have any arm problems. Maybe after 5 or 6 sets it could be a different story, but 2 and a bit sets of heavy hitting, I thought not too bad on the comfort scale. I didn't have any discomfort afterwards. So that is the strengths of the setup. Onto the weaknesses. It's just ineffective when the balls slow up, and I don't play well in slower conditions anyway. But when I'm not getting zip off of the court, I don't play with nearly enough spin to get that kick off of the court, and so I need a little bit of something from the setup to help me in that regard, and it's not here. I'm not going to find it here. And I've got to take some of the blame as well. In the second set, I don't think I played anywhere near enough drop shots or even junk balls, but then when I sliced it, it would just sit up and he would run around and hit the forehand, which was bouncing so high, or kicking pretty aggressively off of the court. But even so, I should have played 1 or 2 more drop shots in the second set, or even the tiebreak, just to change up the rhythm, make him defend at the net rather than me overpressing and making errors that way. And so that is the main negative. I just lose all precision and plan A goes out the window. So we need to come up with a plan B, and we also need to see if we can find some equipment that could help us in the slower conditions when the balls get a bit softer and they lose pressure. So on to some strings that I've shortlisted, and the first string I've had a look at is, if I pull up the database and have a look, it's not too much stiffer at all. It's the Yonex Polytour Tough 16L. If we go across the table and have a look at the stats, the dwell time is a bit longer at 35.2 milliseconds. So in comparison to the Polytour Rev, it should be a little less powerful, which should help us when the balls are losing pressure and they're traveling further. That should rein in the power a little bit, should rein in the distance, so I don't have to worry too much about the ball going long. The deflection is 32.1 millimeters, so a tiny bit higher. In theory, we should get a little bit more snapback, and I'm moaning about how I don't get any spin from the setup with the older balls. That would help us a tiny bit. So perhaps that's something we could look at and utilize to our advantage. And if we go a bit further along, the stiffness is recorded at 193.7 pounds, so a tiny bit less powerful on top of the other stats. Going across, we've got the tension loss percentage here, 41.2%. So a little bit of a downgrade there, something to be aware of. The energy return is 85.7%, so a little less powerful. And finally, we've got the string-to-string friction at 0.087. So in theory, the mains struggle a little bit more to move on the crosses and snap back. So that might cancel out the extra deflection. That's something to bear in mind. But that's the first string I've shortlisted. There is another one, and it is the Headhawk 18, the 1.20 version. If we look at the dwell time, that was recorded at 34.0 milliseconds, which is very low. That is a massive difference from the Polytour Rev. And when you get a difference like that, usually it means that the string is a lot more powerful. And that is not what we want, but I did shortlist it for a reason. So if we move further along the table, we can see the deflection was recorded at 31.9 millimeters. So not a massive increase in precision. Well, in theory, we should have more precision. So not a massive increase in precision, but moving further along, we've got the stiffness also a bit higher at 194.3 pounds. So despite the dwell time being a lot lower and potentially being more powerful, hopefully the increase in stiffness should rein in that power, and we're left with a setup that has less deflection and more precision. At least that is the hope. And moving further along, we've got the tension maintenance, or the tension loss rather, recorded at 28.9%. So that's another thing that caught my eye. So even if in the beginning of using this setup, it turns out that it's slightly more powerful, after maybe about a week or two of using it, hopefully that tension maintenance will keep the string bed playable, and playable for longer in comparison to the string that we're currently using, which is the Polytour Rev. At least that's the hope. And moving further along, we've got an energy return of 88.0%, very powerful to be fair, and the string to string friction is 0.071, which is lower than average. So in theory, the mains should find it easier to slide and snap back on the crosses. So despite the deflection being less, we could find ourselves out on court playing with even more spin, because the string finds it easier to move and snap back on the crosses. So yeah, it is like a puzzle, and the only way to find out if we're really playing better is to get it out on court and test it, and ideally record some of the data. So those are the two strings that I've shortlisted. Unfortunately, I don't have the budget to buy either of them, because my budget is £12 and 2 pence, and that's just not enough to buy anything at the moment, except a few overgrips, which I did, and we'll have a look at what is in my inventory soon. Also, I want to state that this is the setup I'm choosing to play with from now on. It's the Volkl Power Bridge 10 mid. Any practice sessions, any tournaments, this is what I'll be using. It's far superior to the other prestige mid in our inventory, but I am hoping that we can get a couple wins at least under our belt, get some sort of income, so we have the budget to buy another set of this Polytour Rev and put it in the prestige mid, because at the moment we just have the one setup. If in a practice session the string goes, or even worse, if it goes in the middle of a tournament, then I'm in a lot of trouble, because I cannot play effectively with the other setup. I may as well just go home at that point, but I'm not gonna go home. I'll go out there, grind as hard as I can, and then chalk up the loss, because that's probably what's gonna happen. But yeah, hopefully we can get some income and at least have another backup setup that is worthy of being a backup setup. That's the plan. We have booked a tournament this Sunday on the 23rd. It is a grade 5 tournament, and for grade 5s in this game, a match win is worth £15, and on top of that, if we win the whole tournament, we'd get a bonus of £30. So if, for example, I have 3 matches, that would be £45 for the matches, and on top of that, the tournament is another 30, so in total that would be a £75 take home. But that's pretty much the perfect scenario. It often doesn't go that way, but we're hoping for the best here. It'll be my first tournament back since November. I believe. I've been out with an elbow injury, and then shortly after that I had an abdominal strain from kick surfing too much. So I've tried to amend that, and the elbow injury has almost completely gone. So I feel like I'm ready to play another tournament, and this is the one we're going to start off with. The courts are AstroTurf, or artificial grass as it's listed on the LTA website. It is the type of surface that I practice on, and it is outdoors, which I also practice on. So pretty much perfect for me, and I think this is probably the best set of conditions for me if I'm going to get back into tournaments. I'm saying that and it's heaping pressure on me already, so I'm going to try and cool that a little bit. I'm going to feel pressure regardless, because this is the first time I'm stepping out into a competitive situation on this project, and so yeah, just got to deal with it, and hopefully we will play about as best as we possibly can. That is the hope. I'm hoping to get a bit of luck in the draw as well. I don't want to be drawing the best player in the tournament first round and then getting knocked out, but if that happens, so be it. I will try and execute my strategy to the best of my ability and hope that's enough. If it isn't, then we have a bunch of data that we can use to hopefully improve and come back a little bit stronger next time. So that is the tournament we've got this Sunday. I'm nervous, but I'm pretty excited. I can't actually wait to play it. Yeah, really excited about that. And also, I also want to mention that I've treated myself to a set of overgrips. Yes, the budget of £12 and 2p doesn't stretch too far, but it stretches far enough to get a set of Artengo overgrips that I can use should I choose to do so. They came out at £4.49 in total. I've got the receipt up here so everyone knows I'm not cheating. And yeah, I don't think I'm actually going to put on a new set of overgrips before the tournament. I felt like I played pretty well in the practice sets against the opponent with the good backhand, but we'll see. Obviously, if the racket is slipping and sliding and it's twisting on ground strokes, then I've got no option but to switch to a new overgrip. But either way, it's not that big a deal. I see how I feel out on court and make the change if I need to. So that is the end of this video, and I want to thank everyone for watching. I do really appreciate it. If you've got any suggestions regarding anything, even the tournament schedule, the setups I'm using, strings, rackets, or if there's any strategies you think I should employ and I'm missing, just drop them in the comments. I take them all on board, and if they fit into the sort of style I want to play or the sort of strategy I want to employ, then of course I'll take it on board and I'll credit you. So that is it for this video. Yeah, thank you again everyone for watching. I really appreciate it. If you enjoyed this, it might be worth checking out our other videos here at Cupenia Tennis, and also if you enjoyed this episode, it might be worth staying tuned for the next episode, which is coming out sometime next week after the tournament. I'll keep you updated on how I got on. Hopefully we got at least one win, hoping for even more really, to be honest, but at least one win is the target, and we'll see how I get on. So yeah, fingers crossed. Until then, I'll hopefully see you all then. Take care everyone.